Learn English through stories D43 PDF. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents 1. The Room of Many Colors, Part 2, 2 grammar page. 1. The Room of Many Colors, Part 2. I Ruskin Bond. When I got to the top, I knocked on the door of the Rani's room. Getting no reply, I walked along the balcony until I reached another doorway. There were wooden panels around the door, with elephants, camels, and turbaned warriors carved into it. As the door was open, I walked boldly into the room, then stood still in astonishment. The room was filled with a strange light. There were windows going right round the room, and each small window pane was made of a different colored glass. The sun that came through one window flung red and green and purple colors on the figure of the little Rani who stood there with her face pressed to the glass. She spoke to me without turning from the window. "This is my favorite room. I have all the colors here. I can see a different world through each pane of glass. Come, join me," and she beckoned to me, her small hand fluttering like a delicate butterfly. I went up to the Rani. She was only a little taller than me, and we were able to share the same window pane. "See, it's a red world," she said. The garden below, the palace, and the lake were all tinted red. I watched the Rani's world for a little while, and then touched her on the arm and said, "I've brought you a rose." She started away from me, and her eyes looked frightened. She would not look at the rose. "Oh, why did you bring it?" she cried, wringing her hands. "He'll be arrested now." "Who'll be arrested?" "The prince, of course." "But I took it," I said. "No one saw me. I and Duck-Eye were inside the house, catching a snake." "Did they catch it?" she asked, forgetting about the rose. "I don't know. I didn't wait to see." "They should follow the snake instead of catching it. It may lead them to a treasure. All snakes have treasures to guard." This seemed to confirm what I had been telling me, and I resolved that I would follow the next snake that I met. "Don't you like the rose, then?" I asked. "Did you steal it?" "Yes." "Good. Flowers should always be stolen. They're more fragrant then." Because of a man called Hitler, war had been declared in Europe, and Britain was fighting Germany. In my comic papers, the Germans were usually shown as blundering idiots, so I didn't see how Britain could possibly lose the war, nor why it should concern India, nor why it should be necessary for my father to join up. But I remember his showing me a newspaper headline which said, "Bombs fall on Buckingham Palace. King and Queen safe." I expect that had something to do with it. He went to Delhi for an interview with the RAF, and I was left in Aya's charge. It was a week I remember well, because it was the first time I had been left on my own. That first night I was afraid of the dark, afraid of the emptiness of the house, afraid of the howling of the jackals outside. The loud ticking of the clock was the only reassuring sound. Clocks really made themselves heard in those days. I tried concentrating on the ticking, shutting out other sounds and the menace of the dark, but it wouldn't work. I thought I heard a faint hissing near the bed, and sat up, bathed in perspiration, certain that a snake was in the room. I shouted for Aya, and she came running, switching on all the lights. "A snake!" I cried. "There's a snake in the room." "Where, Baba?" "I don't know where, but I heard it." Aya looked under the bed and behind the chairs and tables, but there was no snake to be found. She persuaded me that I must have heard the breeze whispering in the mosquito curtains. But I didn't want to be left alone. "I'm coming to you," I said, and followed her into her small room near the kitchen. Aya slept on a low-string cot. The mattress was thin, the blanket worn and patched up, but Aya's warm and solid body made up for the discomfort of the bed. I snuggled up to her and was soon asleep. I had almost forgotten the Rani in the old palace and was about to pay her a visit when, to my surprise, I found her in the garden. I had risen early that morning and had gone running barefoot over the dew-drenched grass. No one was about, but I startled a flock of parrots, and the birds rose screeching from a banyan tree and wheeled away to some other corner of the palace grounds. I was just in time to see a mongoose scurrying across the grass with an egg in its mouth. The mongoose must have been raiding the poultry farm at the palace. I was trying to locate the mongoose's hideout and was on all fours in a jungle of tall cosmos plants when I heard the rustle of clothes and turned to find the Rani staring at me. She didn't ask me what I was doing there, but simply said, "I don't think he could have gone in there." "But I saw him go this way," I said. "Nonsense. He doesn't live in this part of the garden. He lives in the roots of the banyan tree." "But that's where the snake lives," I said. "You mean the snake who was a prince? Well, that's whom I'm looking for." "A snake who was a prince," I gaped at the Rani. She made a gesture of impatience with her butterfly hands and said, "Tut, you're only a child. You can't understand. The prince lives in the roots of the banyan tree, but he comes out early every morning. Have you seen him?" "No, but I saw a mongoose." The Rani became frightened. "Oh dear, is there a mongoose in the garden? He might kill the prince." "How can a mongoose kill a prince?" I asked. "You don't understand, Master Bond. Princes, when they die, are born again as snakes." "All princes?" "No, only those who die before they can marry." "Did your prince die before he could marry you?" "Yes, and he returned to this garden in the form of a beautiful snake." "Well," I said, "I hope it wasn't the snake the water carrier killed last week." "He killed a snake." The Rani looked horrified. She was quivering all over. "It might have been the prince." "It was a brown snake," I said. "Oh, then it wasn't him." She looked very relieved. "Brown snakes are only ministers and people like that. It has to be a green snake to be a prince." "I haven't seen any green snakes here." "There's one living in the roots of the banyan tree. You won't kill it, will you?" "Not if it's really a prince." "And you won't let others kill it?" "I'll tell Aya." "Good. You're on my side. But be careful of the gardener. Keep him away from the banyan tree. He's always killing snakes. I don't trust him at all." She came nearer and, leaning forward a little, looked into my eyes. "Blue eyes, I trust them. But don't trust green eyes. And yellow eyes are evil." "I've never seen yellow eyes." "That's because you're pure," she said, and turned away and hurried across the lawn as though she had just remembered a very urgent appointment. The sun was up, slanting through the branches of the banyan tree, and Aya's voice could be heard calling me for breakfast. "Ducky," I said, when I found him in the garden later that day, "Duckati, don't kill the snake in the banyan tree." "A snake in the banyan tree," he exclaimed, seizing his hose. "No, no," I said. "I haven't seen it, but the Rani says there's one. She says it was a prince in its former life, and that we shouldn't kill it." "Oh," said Duckeye, smiling to himself. "The Rani says so, all right. You tell her we won't kill it." Is it true that she was in love with a prince, but that he died before she could marry him? Something like that, said Duck-Eye. It was a long time ago, before I came here. My father says it wasn't a prince, but a commoner. Are you a commoner, Duck-Eye? A commoner? What's that, Chota Sahib? I'm not sure. Someone very poor, I suppose. Then I must be a commoner, said Duck-Eye. Were you in love with the Rani? I asked. Duck-Eye was so startled that he dropped his hose and lost his balance. The first time I'd seen him lose his poise while squatting on his haunches. Don't say such things, Chota Sahib. Why not? You'll get me into trouble. Then it must be true. Duck-Eye threw up his hands in mock despair and started collecting his implements. It's true, it's true, I cried, dancing round him, and then I ran indoors to Aya and said, Aya, Duck-Eye was in love with the Rani. Aya gave a shriek of laughter, then looked very serious and put her finger against my lips. Don't say such things, she said. Duck-Eye is of a very low caste. People won't like it if they hear what you say, and besides, the Rani told you her prince died and turned into a snake. Well, Duck-Eye hasn't become a snake as yet, has he? True, Duck-Eye didn't look as though he could be anything but a gardener, but I wasn't satisfied with his denials or with Aya's attempts to still my tongue. Hadn't Duck-Eye sent the Rani a nosegay? When my father came home, he looked quite pleased with himself. What have you brought for me? Was the first question I asked. He had brought me some new books, a dartboard, and a train set, and in my excitement over examining these gifts, I forgot to ask about the result of his trip. It was during tiffin that he told me what had happened, and what was going to happen. We'll be going away soon, he said. I've joined the Royal Air Force. I'll have to work in Delhi. Oh, will you be in the war, Dad? Will you fly a plane? No, I'm too old to be flying planes. I'll be 40 years old in July. The RAF will be giving me what they call intelligence work, decoding secret messages and things like that, and I don't suppose I'll be able to tell you much about it. This didn't sound as exciting as flying planes, but it sounded important and rather mysterious. Well, I hope it's interesting, I said. Is Delhi a good place to live in? I'm not sure. It will be very hot by the middle of April. And you won't be able to stay with me, Ruskin, not at first anyway, not until I can get married quarters, and then, only if your mother returns meanwhile, you'll stay with your grandmother in Dara. He must have seen the disappointment in my face, because he quickly added, Of course, I'll come to see you often. Dara isn't far from Delhi, only a night's train journey. But I was dismayed. It wasn't that I didn't want to stay with my grandmother, but I'd grown so used to sharing my father's life, and even watching him at work, that the thought of being separated from him was unbearable. Not as bad as going to boarding school, he said. And that's the only alternative. Not boarding school, I said quickly. I'll run away from boarding school. Well, you won't want to run away from your grandmother. She's very fond of you. And if you come with me to Delhi, you'll be alone all day in a stuffy little hut while I'm away at work. Sometimes I may have to go on tour. Then what happens? I don't mind being on my own. And this was true. I'd already grown accustomed to having my own room and my own trunk and my own bookshelf, and I felt as though I was about to lose these things. Will I come too? I asked. My father looked thoughtful. Would you like that? I must come, I said firmly. Otherwise, I'll run away. I'll have to ask her, said my father. Aya, it turned out, was quite ready to come with us. In fact, she was indignant that father should have considered leaving her behind. She had brought me up since my mother went away, and she wasn't going to hand over charge to any upstart aunt or governess. She was pleased and excited at the prospect of the move, and this helped to raise my spirits. "What is Dara like?" I asked my father. "It's a green place," he said. "It lies in a valley in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it's surrounded by forests. There are lots of trees in Dara." "Does grandmother's house have trees?" "Yes. There's a big jackfruit tree in the garden. Your grandmother planted it when I was a boy. And there's an old banyan tree, which is good to climb. And there are fruit trees, lichis, mangoes, papayas." "Are there any books?" "Grandmother's books won't interest you, but I'll be bringing you books from Delhi whenever I come to see you." I was beginning to look forward to the move. Changing houses had always been fun. Changing towns ought to be fun too. A few days before we left, I went to say goodbye to the Rani. "I'm going away," I said. "How lovely," said the Rani. "I wish I could go away." "Why don't you?" "They won't let me. They're afraid to let me out of the palace." "What are they afraid of, Your Highness?" "That I might run away. Run away, far, far away, to the land where the leopards are learning to pray." Gosh, I thought, she's really quite crazy, but then she was silent and started smoking a small hookah. She drew on the hookah, looked at me and asked, "Where is your mother?" "I haven't one." "Everyone has a mother." "Did yours die?" "No, she went away." She drew on her hookah again and then said, very sweetly, "Don't go away." "I must," I said. "It's because of the war." "What war? Is there a war on?" "You see, no one tells me anything." "It's between us and Hitler," I said. "And who is Hitler?" "He's a German." "I knew a German once, Dr. Schrainherr. He had beautiful hands." "Was he an artist?" "He was a dentist." The Rani got up from her couch and accompanied me out onto the balcony. When we looked down at the garden, we could see Duckeye weeding a flower bed. Both of us gazed down at him in silence, and I wondered what the Rani would say if I asked her if she had ever been in love with the palace gardener. Aya had told me it would be an insulting question, so I held my peace. But as I walked slowly down the spiral staircase, the Rani's voice came after me. "Thank him," she said. "Thank him for the beautiful rose." The end. 2. Grammar page.